What the city is talking about. The news that impacts you. Welcome to the Montreal Now podcast with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall.
Welcome to another edition of The Week That Was here on the iHeartRadio Network. I'm Aaron Rand along with Natasha Hall, and this week we'll take a look at these stories. The results of a new study on young people who've adopted vegetarian diets and how it affects their growth.
We'll also talk about what's going on with the leaked Roe versus Wade document and what reopening the abortion debate in the States could mean for Canada.
And with more and more Canadians traveling, it might not come as a surprise to discover that airports are busier than ever. But it seems the rush has caught many by surprise, including Transport Canada. We'll take a closer look.
But we start with this today. While there may be no such thing as a magic pill to help you lose weight, it seems new medication is proving very effective in helping with weight loss. Is it too good to be true?
Reading a piece today, and this is typically not something we would talk about with Dr. Chris Labos. Usually we're talking about, COVID and precautions and vaccines. But the story that was in today, his editorial, happens to do with weight loss, and it's something we don't really talk about a whole lot anymore. Look, those commercials are still on TV. There are still all those companies that promise you weight loss, right? And there's new ones too. Someone for something, I think it's called Zune or whatever, different ways to try to lose weight. So Dr. Labos, in writing about this today, the suggestion from what I understand is there's some good news on the pharmacological front. So can you explain what that news is and how significant it might be?
Right. So here's the thing. I mean, we've been trying to develop weight loss medications for some time. It's just that they've, to a large degree been failures. You look back at some of the earlier things like DNP, which was actually causing hyperthermia and heat stroke in patients and killed a bunch of people before it was taken off the market. And then you had amphetamines that were being used as, diet pills, and that was obviously a bad idea before they were taken off the market. So there's been multiple attempts to develop a weight loss medication, like an actual, prescription-based, proven weight loss medication. It's just that they've largely been unsuccessful. More recently, there's been some attempts with things like Orlistat and Contrave, other medications, but they've never become very popular because their benefits have been really, really limited, and the amount of weight loss was relatively small, and there were still issues with side effects. And sort of the big innovation was the development of this new class of medication, which are actually diabetes medications. These are called GLP receptor agonists. And they're used to treat diabetes, but one of the side effects that was observed in the trial is that the patients who got them actually lost weight, and then they were subsequently tested as weight loss medications even in patients without diabetes, and you saw significant weight loss. So you had the first agent which was ever developed, which was called liraglutide, which had a benefit. That was largely supplanted then by semaglutide, a similar medication in the same class, which actually had better weight loss. And now you have Eli Lilly's new medication, which has yet to come on the market, showing an even better increase in weight loss. So you're seeing now the development of a class of medications that have more and more evidence backing them up, showing that they are actually quite effective at weight loss, at promoting weight loss in patients when you couple them with diet and exercise, obviously. And it's the first time that we can really speak rather confidently about pharmacologically treating obesity as a medical problem to help people lose weight, because the problem is just telling somebody to go out and eat right and exercise. I mean, that's not really a strategy for weight loss. If it was that easy to lose weight, people would lose weight. It's a very difficult thing to do, and now you actually have medications that can actually help.
As you're describing it, Dr. Labos, it's seeming a little bit like Nicorette, like helping, like an aid to help people quit a bad habit. Is it kind of like that? Because you definitely made clear that this has to be done in conjunction with good diet and exercise.
Yes, it does. And here's the thing. What we often don't realize is that there are very complex hormonal things going on inside our bodies when we try to lose weight. And that's part of the reason why just dieting and exercise in and of themselves are not going to be enough. You really have to break the hormonal cycle going on that is triggering hunger. And that's what a lot of these, and that's why I think these medications are very effective. Interestingly enough, a lot of what's happening pharmacologically with these agents is the same type of thing that we see when patients go for gastric bypass surgery. The same change in the internal hormonal levels seems to be affected by the same thing. So we're realizing that obesity is a medical problem in the same way that diabetes is a medical problem, in the same way that hypertension is a medical problem, right? You wouldn't tell somebody with diabetes, stop being diabetic. You would give them the medication and tell them, also watch while you eat. So it's not a either-or proposition. You do healthy lifestyle factors plus medication to get the medical problem under control.
So you mentioned gastro bypass surgery, and I know that's in your piece. You talk about, bariatric surgery being actually pretty impressive in terms of benefits it offers. Now, not everyone can afford to do that. And a lot of people worried at the beginning, you're basically going in for surgery in a sense to correct that problem. Is that still, do you believe, a good way to deal with weight loss? I mean, long term?
Yeah, listen, bariatric surgery has a very impressive evidence base behind it in terms of not just getting people to lose weight, but in actually effectively curing disease. Like if you consider being able to come off your diabetes medication as a cure for diabetes, you can essentially cure diabetes. There have been studies showing that they can get people to either reduce or, frankly, eliminate the medications they were taking for obesity-related medical problems. So bariatric surgery is something that we probably underuse, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Obviously, it's expensive. Obviously, it's access to care, right? I mean, everything has been thrown off because of COVID, so surgeries have been delayed. And it is a surgery, right? There are risks to going in for surgery. Right. There are complications, but the complications are generally low, and it is something that we should definitely look at because, I mean, there are risks to surgery, obviously, but there are risks to having diabetes, to having high blood pressure, and to not treating these problems as aggressively as you possibly could.
So it's sounding to me like this medication is like an effective alternative to having that weight loss surgery. But any concerns, Dr. Labos, about people just sort of thinking, finally we have that magic pill to help people lose weight?
Well, I mean, there is it can never be a license to no medication is a license to be unhealthy, right? In the same way that, once Panting and Bess discovered insulin and started to be used clinically, that didn't mean that people didn't have to worry about diabetes anymore. It just means that you have a more effective way to deal with it. And so these medications, and again, there are drawbacks to these medications. They are injectable medications, and that makes it, unattractive to some people because people just don't like needles. They are expensive if you don't have private insurance and can't be covered by the government program. So there are barriers to using these medications, but I think we have to acknowledge that they are there, and people need to be aware of them because they are very valid treatment options that can help people deal with a lot of these sort of, this is a common problem that we have. And if you need to lose weight to make yourself healthier, this is one more thing that you can do to make that happen.
Can I just ask, with respect to Health Canada, because some people might go to their GP and say, hey, I heard about this, I read about this in the paper, et cetera. Where's Health Canada on all of these?
So these are approved medications. You can prescribe them. The issue becomes in it being covered. So if you're diabetic, so the way it works in Quebec is that if you're diabetic and you need this medication as an add-on to existing treatment, it'll get covered. Wow. If you're not diabetic, if you're prescribing it solely for weight loss, it won't be covered unless you have private insurance. But these medications exist. The new one from Eli Lilly hasn't been approved yet, but the other ones that I mentioned, liraglutide and semaglutide, those are available and you can give them. Most people prefer semaglutide because it's a once-weekly injection rather than a daily injection with the older medication.
By the way, just to point out, the one you just mentioned, semaglutide, you point out in one of the studies here, average weight loss of 52 pounds over 72 weeks. Some people think I got to lose all that weight at once, and we've all been told, there should be a limit to how much you lose. Like a pound a week is probably not bad. That seems to be, right on target.
Yeah, no, listen, if a pound a week is phenomenal if you can do that, because here's the problem. A lot of these like fads and all that, you lose a bunch of weight right at the beginning, right, and then you gain it all back, and that yo-yo effect is not desirable. True weight loss, like true sustainable weight loss, is very slow. I mean, if you think that it took you 20 years to put on those extra, 20, 30, 40 pounds, you're not going to lose it in the course of a month. It takes a while, and so that's why these studies, when they're done, they're usually like 1 to 2 year follow-up study. So yeah, you're looking at, maybe about a pound a week in terms of weight loss.
Okay. And then I'm curious, I guess in long-term study, we'll have to see if people are able to keep those pounds off, because we certainly also hear when there is, a lot of weight loss that, eventually people tend to gain that weight back.
Oh yes, absolutely. And there's a fascinating body of research about, the TV show, The Biggest Loser, and how a lot of these people lost the weight for the TV show and gained it all back because the weight loss strategies they used were actually not very scientific and not sustainable. What we've seen now with, the studies of bariatric surgery and with some of these medications, the weight does seem to be sustainable for the most part. It obviously varies from person to person. By disrupting the hormonal patterns that are triggering and leading to weight gain, you are sort of breaking the cycle. And it's much easier to maintain weight than it is to lose it. So if you can lose the excess weight that you don't need, it's usually easier for patients to maintain a weight that they are, that they are stable at.
Very cool. Can I just also say, Dr. Labos, I'm pretty tickled to be talking about anything other than COVID with you. Because that never happens anymore.
I got a lot of rabbits in my hat. We can talk about all kinds of stuff if you guys want.
Well, just the mask mandate, it's done as of May 14th. That's the announcement we had today. I mean, real quick, you're a doctor. You think this is not probably still a good idea, do you?
I'm not as sanguine as some other people seem to be. I'm going to keep wearing my mask in public settings if I'm going to be indoors with a bunch of other people.
That says
you heard it
right
from a
there.
doctor. That's kind of how we think. Yeah. Dr. Labos, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. You take care.
You too. Dr. Chris Labos, who you can hear, by the way, here on CJD on Weekends with Ken. That's every Sunday morning at 8:10.
Informative, interactive, and always interesting. This is Montreal Now with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall.
While there's no argument that eating more fruits and vegetables is good for you, more and more younger people are deciding to go vegetarian, which has raised the issue of whether a lack of animal protein in their diets might affect their growth. Interesting study that is out now. And I guess, Natasha, if you're a parent and wondering about, what's the right thing to feed your child, what's not the right thing to feed your child, this is interesting because it seems like it kind of makes sense, right? Because the idea is we know red meat, certainly as an adult, you want to limit the amount of red meat that you eat. I think we've all acknowledged that, right? And there are plenty of people now who are vegetarians. But what about children who eat a vegetarian diet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, as you know, our 10-year-old announced just a couple of months ago that she has decided that she's vegetarian, and we've been trying to be supportive of that, but with some concern that her nutrition, that she's getting all the nutrients and the protein, everything that she needs as she's growing, right? So what I find a bit of a relief, more than a bit of a relief with this study, is that in fact it's been found that kids who eat a vegetarian diet have very similar measures of growth and nutrition to those children who eat meat. That said, researchers do have some recommendations. So let's talk to Dr. Jonathan McGuire. He is the lead author of the study, also a pediatrician at St. Michael's Hospital of Unity Health in Toronto. Thank you for your time today, Dr. McGuire.
Oh, you're welcome. Lovely to be here. Thanks for the time.
So tell us about these findings, because I personally am relieved but also a little surprised that vegetarian and meat-eating kids are about equal, it seems.
Well, that's just it. I was really interested to hear your story about your child and being vegetarian because, that very same thing happened to me. And I got to thinking about that, and I thought, geez, I wonder if it's the right thing. So I happened to co-lead a large children's study in Canada called Target Kids, and I thought, well, you know what, let's figure this out. And so we tracked about 9,000 children over a period of about 10 years, and we followed them along. I think the average duration of follow-up was about 2.5 or 3 years. About 248 of those kids, parents told us they had vegetarian diets, and I wanted to see how those kids were doing relative to everybody else, and it turns out they're doing just fine. On average, children whose parents tell us they have vegetarian diets, they seem to be growing just the same. They seem to have the same markers of nutrition as children without vegetarian diets. So I think that's a really, really great news story for the many Canadian families whose parents choose or children choose to be vegetarian.
So I'm wondering then, if that's the case and the growth patterns seem to be pretty close to each other, do we then assume that as you get older and life that begins to change, or do we not have data to suggest that's in fact what happens?
Yeah, well, we followed kids to about age 8 years, but I'm really interested to see what happens later in life. I'm going to be around for a while, I hope, following these families, and I'm really so grateful that these families are hanging in with us as we follow their children. But I expect that we'll see health benefits for children who are vegetarian later on. I think that that we found that the children's nutrition is the same is really reassuring, and that based on other literature, we expect things to keep getting better with time. So I think it's a really good news story. All in.
I agree. Dr. McGuire, I'm wondering, you said you experienced this with your own child as well, or children, and part of the concern for me is that my child is of an age yet where she's not really into, like kidney beans and lentils or tofu. I can sneak some of it in some places, but most of the time she's eating lots of like tortellini with cheese and things like that. How concerned do we need to be that the kids are still getting enough protein and things that they need from lentils and kidney beans if they don't want to eat that stuff?
Yeah, well, I think you raise a really important point. And, in general, it is a little bit harder to get the same number of calories and the same amount of all the essential nutrients from vegetables as it is for diets that contain meat. So, for most children, that's not a barrier. And I think parents are going about it thoughtfully. And I really think that's why we're not seeing much difference, because people are putting thought into it. However, when we looked very closely at the children who had undernutrition, so the very tiny children, the ones that are growing below the third percentile, okay, they seem to be having, those children who are vegetarian seem to be having a little more trouble with weight gain, which I think is sensible that, if you're adding something that makes it a little bit more difficult on top of a child who's already struggling may not be the wisest thing. And I think that's really consistent with the majority of families who seem to be doing this in a thoughtful, I think, quite positive way.
What are some of the things you might recommend, in a circumstance like that? Like I said, lots of pasta, lots of cheese and things like that. But what would be some of the recommendations that you might make to make sure the kids are getting all the nutrients they need?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the kinds of nutrients that tend to be harder for children to take in general tend to be a little bit more worrisome with vegetarian diets. So they include dietary calcium. So you have to think carefully about vegetables that contain calcium. Dietary iron. So again, vegetables that contain dietary iron. We've seen that the children who are vegetarian, more of them tend to be on, iron supplements because their parents are concerned about iron intake. And as well as vitamin D if the children aren't consuming, fortified cow's milk.
Okay. Well, what about when, and I'm going to guess at that age, or maybe this is still a bit young because you're talking about 8 years of age as the follow through in the study. Your child sees someone eating a hot dog, they say they want to have something like that. The idea is, do you want to eliminate all meat from a diet? Is that what you're seeing some parents want to do? Or can you introduce some? How does it work?
Well, I think it's a great question because vegetarian diets come in many different stripes, and different people, categorize vegetarian diets entirely differently. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really whatever the individual feels comfortable with. Some people, for example, drink milk. Other people don't. Some people eat eggs. Other people don't. So I think it really depends on the individual. I think for the most part, people making vegetarian diet decisions based on whatever belief system they have, whatever they hold value, I think is really important. One of the criticisms we got on this paper was, in fact, how do you know these families were vegetarian? And I said, well, they told us they were vegetarian, and that's what matters most to me. And I think that's what matters most to most people.
I'm curious if you found that, and again, 8 years old, I'm going to guess that most of the time these are, as you said, vegetarian families. It's not necessarily the children making the decision for themselves, but I feel like we're going to be seeing more and more like my daughter who decided on her own.
Mine. That's right. I think so too, and I think children are becoming more health conscious. They're becoming more environmentally conscious, and I think when these kinds of trends emerge, it's up to us, us parents and researchers to say, hey, is this the right thing? And I think in this case, it looks like it's the right thing. So that's a great news story.
It's funny as you say this, I think to myself, if you're 6 years old, I can't imagine that I would have at some point gone to my parent and say, you know what, I'd like to do something good for the environment. I don't want to eat cows anymore.
Times have
just
changed.
Feed me. I know, but just feed me vegetables. How does this begin with? Do you have any idea? Where does it come from?
Well, I think kids are saying these things to parents. It's anecdotal evidence. I'm a pediatrician, and I hear the stories that families tell us. And kids are, I guess, they're getting it from school and in the media, and they want to do something good for the planet, and they feel this is a good way to do it. And so, my response back is, okay, well, then let's just do it in a thoughtful way. And, for people that aren't sure or they have questions, that's a good prompt to go see your healthcare provider and ask all those questions to make sure that the child's diet is nutritionally complete.
Well, can I just ask, though, with respect to a nutritionally complete diet, is there something you do want to watch out for if your child has decided to be vegetarian, with respect to what they're not eating or getting?
Well, like I said, I would just be careful with those foods that tend to be harder for those nutrients that tend to be harder for children to take at the best of times. They include dietary calcium, iron, and vitamin D. Those are really the three that are a little bit more difficult than many of the others.
And when in doubt, I guess, should we be consulting a pediatrician? Because I'm thinking, like, my daughter eats lots of broccoli. She eats lots of healthy stuff,
wonderful.
so I'm not too concerned. But would there be signs to look out for if your child was iron deficient or calcium deficient?
Well, I think, seeking help from your healthcare provider is always a wise thing if you're not sure. And one of the nice things that we have in Canada, one of the really important things is our primary healthcare providers watch the child's growth every time we visit them. So they're keeping an eye on how things are going. And if there's any uncertainty or things aren't working out, they're there to help you with that. So a good prompt to see your healthcare provider if you're not sure.
Who would have thought? I have to just say one more time, I'm very surprised by the findings of this study. I would not have thought that a meatless diet would have the same results as a diet with meat for kids in terms of growth and nutrition. Very interesting.
By the way,
thanks so much for your interest.
Is there a difference, just in asking, as Natasha said, that between boys and girls, any difference at all?
Yeah, we thought there might be, and actually tested that, and they seem to be about the same, which is, I think, also a really great news story.
All right. Interesting stuff. Dr. McGuire, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. The very best.
All right. There you go. So your daughter, the 9-year-old or 10-year-old vegetarian, is apparently on the right track. You're okay.
Thank goodness. I mean, she doesn't like when I say this, but she's a bit of a scrawny little thing. So, it is a concern. I'm always trying to make sure that she's eating enough and growing, but she's healthy. She likes to eat a lot of the things that she needs to be eating. So, I just got to figure out a way to get like lentils and chickpeas and stuff.
Someone just texted in as you're saying that you can buy like pasta infused with lentils and that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, and the patties. I have tried the patties. She didn't super dig those. And someone's saying tofu butter chicken. So she is coming around to like tofu, and she loves butter chicken. So that is an excellent suggestion. Thank you.
Asking questions, looking for answers. Here's more of Montreal Now with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall.
If you're looking to travel anytime soon, make sure that along with your luggage, you pack your patience. Long wait times at the airport and long passport renewal times have become the new normal. We look for some answers as to why. Martin Firestone is president of Travel Secure. He's an insurance broker in travel medical coverage as well. Martin, thanks for being back with us. And let's start by talking about the passport issue. Just how serious is it now? How long are you having to wait?
Yeah, it's really bad. But when you think about it, it's not unexpected. I mean, for 2.5 to 3 years, nobody even checked their passports or cared to because they weren't traveling. Now, lo and behold, restrictions removed. I'm ready to travel. I get my passport, and I see there's less than 6 months on it or it's expired, and now the problems begin. Over 1 million applicants different than the same time period last year. They don't have the infrastructure to handle it.
What's the time frame on these? I said months. Can it be months?
Oh, easily. Like, if you're going to go the mail route, you better not have any trip planned because, quite frankly, if you are depending on a passport to go on that trip, you aren't going to get it. And you know what? You have no cancellation insurance of any sort that covers you in the event of not getting a passport. So put that out of your mind. Nothing will cover you for not getting a passport, no. So you got to go the route of an appointment, lining up like you see what's going on, and then paying additional dollars for an express service. All this, you hope, has to line up perfectly in order for you to get the passport.
Yeah, and even just getting an appointment can be tricky because we were trying to get our daughters. This was back at Christmas time for us, and we were just traveling domestically, so it wasn't crucial. But nonetheless, Martin, just trying to get the appointment, it took weeks. I think there was, honestly, at that point, I think it was a 3-week delay just to get an appointment. So, incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, it's a real problem, and I understand why it's happening. And it's not even staffing as much at passport offices versus the airport issues we're having. It's sheer numbers, and it's almost impossible to catch up. It will ultimately, but the question is when, and we have summer coming up. So how soon is that going to happen?
So at the airports, Martin, then the main problem is the staff problem, and what should people be trying to do to be able to travel and not lose their sanity?
Yeah, the only hope is, honestly, if they tell you 2 hours or 3 hours on international, I mean, I hate to say it, just go earlier than even that. I mean, what's the worst that can happen is you sit around at the airport. Nothing could be worse than being frustrated in line and not making your flight. And in the old days, they used to say, who has an 8 o'clock flight? They'd move you ahead because you were running late. No. That line that's now going up and down the aisles, back and forth, there's nowhere to begin, no one to take out a line. It's hundreds and hundreds of people that potentially could miss their flights.
I was joking yesterday, that idea about, they'll get to the airport 3 hours before your flight. No one ever does that. And by no one, I mean, people I know like me. But nowadays, that's the warning, and you better do it because, as we've seen, the situation is pretty terrible and not getting better anytime fast, right? No time soon, from what I can tell.
May 1st weekend is not traditionally the busiest season, and we had this issue, so you can only imagine what summer could be like if they don't get it rectified. And you can't just press a button and 500 people all of a sudden show at the airport that day, and they're either good for security, baggage, check-in. It's just not that simple. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. Okay.
So with regards, just quickly before we let you go, the government has been called in to Pearson to help out. What could the government do to help here, Martin?
Well, additional people, no doubt, at screening and check-in. Remember, one other small point, people don't want to wait for their bags 2 hours when they land anymore, so they're taking carry-on. But when you take carry-on, you now leave yourself open to people having to check your bag during those screenings and checkup lines. So it's almost like a domino effect. So you get it there or you get it here. The bottom line is they got to get there early and not feel under pressure that they're going to miss a flight. Even if they get there, just sit and be happy.
Sounds like a fun way to travel. Marty, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys, for
Martin
having me. Take care.
You bet. Over at Travel Secure. Meanwhile, as far as traveling internationally, Christine Latremolle joins us from time to time. She's director of Uniglobe Travel Agency here in Montreal, in Dorval. Christine, what are you seeing with respect to people actually traveling now? Are you seeing Europe? Are you seeing southern destinations? Where are people going?
Well, we're certainly seeing a massive increase in the number of people that want to travel. Certainly over just after Christmas and March break, it was overwhelming. We were overwhelmed with requests and people just wanting to get away. That's tapered off just a little bit. The next wave is people that want to go away for the summer vacation, for construction holiday, for honeymooners, big time of year for honeymooners. And a lot of that traffic is directed more to international destinations. And to speak to what Mark just said, absolutely. The first two questions we ask every single caller is, do you have a valid passport? And how long is it good for? And of course, are you double vaccinated at the minimum? And so there are some roadblocks, and the volume of bookings is easily triple what it was even pre-COVID.
Wow.
So yes, we're seeing a big increase.
Okay, so if the bookings are triple, how are the prices? Are the prices triple too? Please say no.
Well, I wouldn't say tripled. No one would be going anywhere, but certainly we're seeing a big increase in airfares. Not so much internationally, but the fuel surcharge has had quite the impact. You've probably seen fares to Toronto are easily $600 or $700 round trip, depending on how far you book in advance. Even fares to Florida, which were typically maybe $300 one way within Florida, $200 or even $195 one way, are now up to $3 something one way. So those fares have increased. Car rentals prices have skyrocketed. Hotels are charging much more.
Yeah.
They're understaffed as well. So really across the whole gamut of travel services, we've seen big increases in pricing.
It really is the way you're describing it. And I was reading a piece on hotel prices going up because everyone's trying to make back the money that they lost during the pandemic, obviously when people weren't traveling. But, just looking the other day, and maybe you can advise people what the best way to go here. You wanted to fly to Athens, for example. I was looking maybe going to Greece in the summer. What used to be a $700 flight is now almost a $1,400 flight. It's literally doubled. So what do you do here if you're trying to find deals? Where do you go, or are there any?
Well, the first rule of thumb is that you book well in advance. The second rule of thumb is make sure that you have a fare that has some leniency towards changes or refunds. That's really critical. But booking in advance is your single best practice. The second would be try and avoid the really peak time. So March break is a peak time.
Right.
The construction holiday is a peak time. Europe in August and September is a peak time. And so everything is skewed towards that being the maximum pricing for hotels and airfares. And you're right. Even Greece, that used to be something of a bargain, is quite a bit more expensive. So book early, go off peak times, and make sure that your rates are flexible to some extent.
Yeah, basically, 2022 seems to be peak time, from what I can see.
Yeah, seems to be that way. Christine, I'm wondering if there's still some hesitation about travel to Europe given the situation in Ukraine.
Well, I would say yes, there is, although people who are experiencing those fears are not necessarily voicing them. We might just not hear from them at all because they don't want to go.
Right.
But I mean, just today I heard someone planning a trip to Switzerland, and they're very concerned about what's going on and about the airspace and how safe travel would be and what their experience will be like. I think for most people that are going to Western Europe, it's a concern, but it's not a deal breaker. Further east, maybe Greece, maybe Turkey, maybe Croatia, there's a bit more hesitancy just because of the proximity to the geographic area that's having so many issues.
Fair enough. And then let me just squeeze in one last question. With the prices being so high right now, do you anticipate those settling down at some point and actually being more reasonable in the future?
That's a really difficult call. We had predicted that it was going to go up because of the fuel surcharges. But as Aaron said, there is a lot of money to be recovered in all aspects of this industry, and not just this industry, of course. And so we suspect that some of this is going to just stay with us for quite a while until staffing is back up, until they can afford more staffing or find more staffing. So I would say the prices are going to be for the duration of at least the next year.
I want to ask you one last thing, Christine. It's been tough for travel agents over the past few years because so many people do everything online these days. Are you finding that's changing a little bit? I mean, I just know looking for myself, you get to a point where you're like, you know what? I don't want to bother doing this. I don't need to check 45 different websites. It gets to a point where you simply say it's too much. I'd rather have someone else do it. Are you starting to see that or not?
That's a really good question. And yes, absolutely. The trend has been to come back to what we call full service versus self-service, merely because there's so many more obstacles to think of. And there are a lot of little sand traps along the way that you could unwittingly step into. So yes, full-time, full-service travel agencies are very much in demand now because our advice is gleaned from hard experience of what could and has happened.
Interesting how that's turning around. Christine, thanks so much for the time. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Christine Lettram-Wall from Uniglobe Travel. So look, there's no way around it. I mean, it's going to cost more for a hotel. It's going to cost more for a flight. Everything is basically going to cost more, and yet people are traveling, what did she say, in bigger numbers now than even before the pandemic.
It makes sense.
Because everyone was cooped up. They don't care. Got to pay what you got to pay.
The stories in the news that are worth your time. Montreal Now with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall.
It's been a very tumultuous week when it comes to a woman's right to choose. Who would have thought that in 2022, the abortion debate would be front and center all over again? But here we are, after a leaked document about the possible overturning of Roe versus Wade in the United States. What effect could this have here in Canada? Should we be concerned about the future of access to safe abortions for Canadian women?
Kelly Gordon is an assistant professor in the political science department at McGill, and she is on the line. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Sure. Listen, this is a pretty big deal. I mean, yes, it's something that's been in place for almost 50 years, but we're talking millions of people here, and something that seems to be dividing at least America almost in half. So can you explain, first of all, what this would entail if passed?
Yeah, so this wouldn't necessarily rewrite the law across the entire United States, but what this overturning Roe v. Wade would do is allow states that want to ban abortion to do so. So what we would see is a lot of southern states, many states in the Midwest, most probably completely banning abortion care in those states.
Okay, but here's what I don't understand. We have these individual states already saying they're going to go ahead and do this, like Texas, for example, without even a decision on this. So what would a decision at the U.S. Supreme Court level do to change that, if anything?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So right now, the Supreme Court, the Roe v. Wade decision was passed in 1973, and then actually it's been diluted since then. So there was another Supreme Court case in 1992 that basically asserted that states during the second trimester of pregnancy couldn't place undue burden on women in accessing abortion care. So a lot of states have been very savvy and very effective at passing laws that, while they fit under this framework, this undue burden framework, made it really difficult for women to tangibly access abortion. So that's a lot of what Republican states have been doing, is passing these laws that effectively are shutting down clinics or making it very difficult for abortion providers to work in those states. So essentially, overturning Roe would, get rid of this undue burden kind of framework.
Mm-hmm. I can't grasp, I just can't believe that this is where we're at again. So I'm going to ask a question that is perhaps impossible to answer, Kelly, but why is this even coming up again? Why are women's rights being eroded?
It's such a good question. I think a lot of people, and women in particular, share the sentiment that you're expressing right now. And I mean, so I don't want to import what's happening in the United States to Canada. So if you want to ask that question about sort of what's happening in Canada, I can answer it. In the United States, this actually isn't a very surprising outcome. Since the Roe v. Wade decision in 1973, there's really been a full-scale attack on abortion rights, a sustained attack. And I would argue that the anti-abortion movement has actually been winning in the U.S. in the last 40 years. And so with the new Supreme Court, with 2 new justices appointed by Trump, many people that follow this really closely are sort of like, it was really just a matter of time before Roe v. Wade got overturned. So in a lot of ways, it feels like a gut punch kind of hearing this last night, waking up to it this morning, but it's actually been something that's kind of been coming for a while.
I guess it's been more insidious though, right? And now it's like right smack in our faces. Now with regards to, what the effect could be in Canada, when we were talking about it, Kelly, we were just thinking about how it would come into play with the Conservative leadership debate this week. Do we need to worry about it beyond that?
So this is a really interesting question. What I would say is, Canadians are a little bit obsessed with American news and politics, and it's very enmeshed in our own politics and news. But Canada has a very distinct and sort of different history with abortion politics. And so in the U.S., what we see is politicians, and particularly conservative and Republican politicians, they see opposing abortion as a vote-getting strategy. And it sort of is, right? We saw this with Donald Trump, a guy who certainly had no investment in the anti-abortion movement until he became, was running for president. And he's like, I need this kind of segment of the Republican Party in order to win the presidency. But in Canada, it's a really different history. And politicians, really since the Morgentaler decision, and even before that, have been very reluctant to bring this issue into the political realm. And I think we're going to see a continuation of that with the Conservative leadership race. What we've heard, I think, today is really not much. And that's because it's a tricky terrain that that conservative leaders have to kind of occupy. On the one hand, they want sort of the support of the social conservative wing of the party while they're running for leadership. But then it really becomes a kind of liability to oppose abortion at the general election level.
That's so odd, though, isn't it? When you think about it, yes, it's a vote getter, or at least a vote attractor perhaps here. But if the Conservatives win, and take a poll that just came out last week, that showed if an election were held today, the Conservatives would end up winning. If the person leading that party has the social conservatives on his or her side, then what? Then that becomes an election issue in a general election.
Well, so what we've seen, and this is really kind of since, it's a Stephen Harper line, right? Which is, I think a lot of people probably rightfully think that personally Stephen Harper opposed abortion. But his way of winning the election, and he was the last conservative leader to hold a majority government, really was to say, look, I'm not going to reopen this issue. I promise I won't do it. And he never touched it in his decade in power. And that's because he knows that there's very high levels of support for abortion rights in Canada generally. And we also saw this with Erin O'Toole, right? Erin O'Toole was pretty ambivalent, kind of quiet about his views about abortion. But then one of the first things that he does when he announces, or when he wins the leadership, is say, I'm pro-choice. I'm not going to touch this issue. So this is something that the Conservatives kind of struggle with, right? Trying to appease a certain part of their party to win the leadership. But a part of their problem. Sorry, this is my baby.
It's great. It adds so much to hear your baby in the background. It's so perfect, Kelly.
I'm so sorry. 4:45 is a hard time for
That's okay.
No worries. Thank you.
So anyway, all of this is to say, at the level of the general election, because there's such high levels of support for abortion care, it becomes a liability for conservative leaders.
Okay. I was going to say, after you brought up Erin O'Toole and talked about his position, said, and then what happened to Erin O'Toole? But
exactly,
anyway.
That's when the baby started to cry a little bit, I think.
No more Erin O'Toole.
Yeah. Hey, Kelly, I want to thank you so much for your time this afternoon. It's very much appreciated.
Thanks for having me.
You bet.
Thank you.
Mom, taking care of business.
That was perfect.
Yeah, that was. That was really, really good.
She was excellent, and then just to have the baby sounds in the background just added so much to that.
I wonder, and she makes a good point, and that's really the history of sort of the party, right? The Conservative Party here. Yeah. You can talk about it, and then you can try to use it as a vote getter, but when it comes time to go to the public, you don't bring it up because the majority of Canadians don't support that position. But is Pierre Poilievre cast from the same kind of mold as the others? I wonder.
I thought it was very interesting what Tom said about how he's kind of not taking interviews these days because he doesn't want to have to answer those questions because those could cost him votes. He knows in Montreal, even as a Conservative, basically you've got to take a pro-choice stance, otherwise forget it. So you can say a lot of things about Pierre Poilievre. He's no dummy.
Also, he's not going to be able to keep avoiding the question, obviously, forever. It's going to come up at some point. Maybe
it's going to come up at the debate this week.
Well, yeah. So he's going to have to craft an answer between now and the time that happens, and we'll see what position they take. And remember, too, I know we don't talk a lot about Leslyn Lewis. She is in the race.
Ugh,
and
sorry.
Maybe that's why we don't talk about her.
I'm so bad.
Okay.
I'm so bad at hiding my feelings, but I just,
but
I can't.
She's very pro-life, right? So consider that. And is that a liability for her? So we'll see how this plays out.
It is not a liability for her because her supporters have the same view as she does, the vast majority of them.
But will others decide? I don't know. We're not going to know until this thing has been running for a couple of weeks, but will she make a point of this? Will others decide to? I agree with you. It's not a winning strategy, we think, if you want to run in a federal election. But have times changed? Would you have said this would have happened in the U.S. now?
I can't believe this is where we're at right now. I'm having flashbacks of a particularly feisty argument I had with Barbara Kay over a woman's right to choose, and she is pro-life and also says she's a feminist. And I was like, I'm sorry, if you're a feminist, you can't tell me what to do with my body. So, but it was a very, very feisty
And so
argument.
It begins again. Mm-hmm. That wraps up another edition of The Week That Was here on the iHeartRadio Network. I'm Aaron Rand along with Natasha Hall, and we will see you next week.
Have an excellent week.
This has been the Montreal Now podcast with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall. Listen live on your radio weekday afternoons from 2 to 6 on CJAD 800 or through the iHeartRadio app.